Hello and welcome to the Office Freedom Podcast Flex with Richard Smith. In today's episode, Richard is actually guesting on Godfrey's podcast Passionate About People, hosted by Phil Dave. They look at what it takes to be a successful leader and the importance of surrounding yourself with individuals who can help boost your productivity. They also talk about some really tough subjects, real life issues, and a bright future ahead. The most important thing to take from this podcast is simple. If you're feeling low, talk to someone. Friends, family, or Richard and Graham will be only happy to chat with you as well. The future's always bright and filled with opportunity.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Passionate About People. My name is Phil Dave. I'm a broadcaster who works primarily in mental health and wellbeing, as well as technology and some other subjects as well.
Hello, I'm Graham Godfrey. I've got a company called Passionate About Business, and I'm passionate about coaching business owners and CEOs as a business mentor and as a mindset coach to keep them positive in building their companies and growing at a substantial rate. I also have my own radio show on Second City Radio where I play jazz, funk and soul and spread the feel-good factor across the UK and, if you think big enough, across the world.
In this episode, we are joined by Richard Smith, who's the founder and CEO of Office Freedom.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Phil and Graham, for having me on today. Yes, as you say, founder and CEO of Office Freedom. We are property agents that specialize in helping clients find flexible office space, also known as serviced offices, co-working space, and all things virtual and hybrid and agile.
Now, Richard, we can't avoid the obvious question straight away. Given the changing face of the office environment, certainly given the pandemic, are you worried about what this means for the future of your company?
Well, I definitely have been quite worried over the last 12 months. I've lived through various recessions and downturns. We had obviously 2007, 2008 was a terrible time in business with a financial crash. Obviously, we had Brexit, which was a challenge. But COVID, I haven't seen anything like that before. So it was a very, very quiet 12 months. And it was really very worrying. And but recently, with the announcements made by Boris Johnson with the exit out of lockdown plan, there was a massive increase in activity and confidence and a surge of improved feeling about the marketplace. But it's been very, very worrying. Definitely, yes.
You know, we've spoken in the past on these podcasts about crisis and opportunities. And we know that when you're in the eye of the storm, it's tough. But all the opportunities are when we come out of the crisis. That's where business is done. What do you think about, I mean, you've spoken extensively about leased offices, and now we've got an opportunity for more companies to come out of that environment into sort of a more flexible workspace. How does that work sort of here in the UK and also abroad? Because I know you have a global operation.
Yes, the leased offices industry was what I was in the early 90s. Well, actually, like when I left school, I went straight into office leasing. I wasn't quite bright enough to go to uni. In those days, it was the minority of people that went to uni. And I'm afraid to say that I didn't quite make the grade. And so I thought I better go straight to work. And I went into work as a commercial estate agent, as a property agent in the leasing world. And I did that for 7 years. And it was by absolute fluke and coincidence that I bumped into serviced offices and business centers when I was looking at some space with a client in Mayfair, and we walked past a building and it said serviced office outside, and we wondered what that was. We went in and then we realized that actually it's something that is much more alternative than traditional leasing. You can move in straight away. Everything's ready to go. And I looked into it and I realized that there was a big gap in that marketplace, and basically set up a property agency, the first one actually ever to specialize in advising clients on serviced offices. So from the leasing side into serviced offices, and it was a slow journey for for 20 years really. It's only in the last 5 years that it's really picked up and larger corporations have embraced it. But pandemic and with COVID, it's really made people think more serious than ever before about reducing overhead, just trying to reduce risk and having more flexibility. So therefore, yes, the flexible serviced office world is really now in focus.
But I was thinking that it's amazing how the environment can make such a difference to one's ability to get on efficiently with work. So, for example, with me, all of this last year, obviously, like many people, I've been working primarily from home. I've done a couple of hours in the office, which is where I'm at my most productive. But then as soon as I have something that doesn't get done from the office or doesn't need to be done from the office, I come straight home and I do the rest from home. I am nowhere near as focused. I'm nowhere near as able to produce the kind of work that I need to produce from a home environment. And by that, I don't mean that the standard's no good. I mean, I'm not as efficient. I can't get as much done.
Yes, I think I think last year when we started with lockdown and the weather was amazing. I mean, even in March, April, or February, March, the weather was incredible. This year, it's middle of April and it's like freezing. So, but at the beginning of lockdown last year, when it first happened, I think everybody thought, it's a different way of doing things, and they just got on with it because, as I said, the weather was nice and it was like working from home, and you could definitely just wake up, go downstairs, start working, no commuting, etc. But we've had over a year of it, and I think people do now miss that social interaction, collaboration, mentorship. And I can tell you factually that it is now slowly but surely happening where people are returning to work. I don't think it will be 24/7 like it used to be, but there will be some kind of a hybrid, middle ground solution.
I mean, I was working at home for months, and I just miss getting out. And we've spoken on this podcast about people's mental health, and you know, there's lots of things that have changed. When you work at home, there's no office politics. You don't have to communicate with anybody. Everything's done on Zoom, but you just miss that social contact. You even miss going out for a sandwich. You just miss being with other people and bouncing off of other people. So I mean, look, you and I, Richard, we've known each other since our 20s. You've always been a go-getter. You've always had a vision to be something big in the property industry, and you've reached that, and now you're going further. I mean, how do you see things going? Are a lot of companies moving around now and taking different offices? Are they having satellite offices or workspaces for most of the staff? Do you see a lot of people returning to work?
Yes, there's been, I drive in every day and you can just tell that there's a lot more traffic. And, even recently we went to the next step of the exit out of lockdown. And so therefore, I think we've got one more step between until the actual end of all restrictions, which is in June, when the pubs, restaurants, everything opens completely. Whereas at the moment, it's just the outside beer gardens and outside of restaurants, etc. But the shops are now open, and people seem to be, they can't wait to get back. And the street the other day, my colleague Lee Miranda, who good friend of mine, but also works with me here, and he said to me, he walking down Oxford Street, and he said it was busier than it was on Christmas Day. So it's definitely going in that direction. And in terms of whereabouts, it's a good point you make. There's demand. I mean, central London in itself is a special place, and I think it will be able to withstand anything that is thrown at it. But there's no doubt that suburban locations are also increasing in popularity because people might not want to work at home, but they also might not want to work in the center of town. So working close to their home, but in an office in suburban locations, we are definitely noticing is something that is increasing in popularity. And on the same way in the US as well. I think in America, they're very much used to relocating from the place where they were raised. I don't know whether you've noticed, but in the UK, wherever we're kind of born, we kind of tend to stay there. It's not in our culture so much to actually just relocate and move to a different area. But in the US, it's you speak to someone in a given city and 9 times out of 10, they weren't raised there. So that concept of moving around in the US is definitely always been prevalent. And yes, we are noticing companies in America looking to move to areas where there's a much more nicer way of living. For example, a lot of people have left Manhattan in New York, and have gone to areas like Florida, Miami, the Panhandle, Tampa, also areas like in Texas, like Austin, Dallas, Houston, proving extremely popular. So yeah, the hub and spoke, as they say, the suburban retreat to retreat, I beg your pardon, from urban to suburban locations is definitely a trend that is happening.
Richard, the one thing I really want to ask you is,
Please
look, I
do.
coach a lot of CEOs, owners of businesses who, through this pandemic, um, have felt very challenged. So a lot of business owners, they don't want to reveal themselves. It's not good for business to reveal yourself if you're
Mm.
under a lot of stress and a lot of strain. But it has taken its toll on a lot of business owners, and mindset is so important. What sort of things have you done to sort of drive yourself forward in this pandemic to come out the other side, and how do you sort of pass that down to your staff and keep them motivated? What sort of things have you been doing?
During the pandemic itself, I have to say that for some reason, I don't know why this was, but before the pandemic hit, I was struggling a bit mentally. I don't know what it was, but it was just maybe just the circumstances of business in general. Even before the pandemic, business wasn't amazing. The it was getting. I sensed actually that it was getting a little bit quieter, and maybe one of the clouds in the silver lining from COVID was that if it had to happen, I got a feeling it's look, when there's something like that, a pandemic, it's much better to happen during a downturn versus interrupting a major upturn boom period. And I have a feeling that the year from like March 20 to a year on around now was going to be pretty difficult in business. So I personally was struggling a bit beforehand, and the pandemic for me enabled me to refocus, and I was so productive for a period of time at home that it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. A lot of people were saying they can't wait to go on holiday, and I was like, I'm actually all right. I'm just focused, trying to get through it. But yeah, it was quite hard to deal with everything going on with the staff and individuals who are used to the collaborative nature of being in the office. Colleagues of mine did struggle, but it was very hard remote. We did have lots of Zooms communicating. We had evening quizzes and that type of thing, and that did last quite a while. And then after a while, it became a little bit more challenging. I think people were a little bit bored of the four walls and wanting to get out and out. And you know what, the backward steps that we took, it was like two steps forward, one step back, and you couldn't quite make the progress. We kept going back into lockdown after thinking that we were maybe out of it, and that became a bit soul destroying and very challenging.
There's one thing though that you said earlier on in that point, which I found quite interesting, which I think some people would possibly like you to explore a bit further. You said that you noticed that it was already sort of on a bit of a downward spiral anyway in the world of business. Out of interest, let's not assume that people relate to what you've just said there. Why do you think that? Because that may even help people cope with what has happened during the pandemic if they thought that it was potentially going downhill anyway.
Why? Look, in the world that I'm in the property world, it's not necessarily what's going on in the outside world that could make it a challenging period. I think everybody thinks that whatever they do for a living, they're in a super highly charged competitive environment. And the one that we're in is no exception. In our world, we have there's serviced office brokers that we compete with. There's commercial property agents that up until very recently, they didn't really take serviced offices very seriously because they just didn't really embrace it. But they have done now because their clients, the end users, actually don't want to necessarily jump into traditional leases anymore without giving it some further thought. And so we now compete with them. And also the serviced office providers that we refer business to, they also do their own marketing and their own direct advertising. So actually, it's quite a challenging existence anyway. And our success is often down to the search engine optimization, where we sit on Google, and we can go up and down on Google depending on various things that nothing to do with the outside world. So for us and for me, it happened to be a difficult period. It may not be the fact that everyone else was experiencing it. I just had that sense that things were going to a dip. So if you're going to have a COVID pandemic, it's much better, in my opinion, to have happened when it did than in the middle of a boom.
Now, I've got an interesting thought that I'd like both of you to answer if you can. What do you think it takes? And I tell you why I ask this is because, Graham, you're forever, well, apart from the fact you lead your own business as well, you speak to leaders, you motivate leaders all the time. And Richard, you are a leader of a highly successful company. What do you think makes a great leader in an organization?
Graham, after you on that one, I think.
I've there's a saying that I've used a lot that has stayed with me. You know, I've been in business 35 years myself. I've built company and sold it, and I've been through the whole cycle, taken on employees. I think that the saying is this: the price of leadership is loneliness, and you can't worry about what people are going to say about you. So what you're effectively doing is you're putting your head above the parapet, and you're not necessarily leading from the front. It's not like charge and everyone follows you. I think a great leader leads from behind and pushes their staff and their key people and their talented people ahead of them, and allow them to flourish. I think that's a great leader that can do that, because people feel inside that they want to do the best they possibly can for the person that they're working for. But being a leader in a company, especially, I mean, Richard would know this. Look, we've both been through 3 or 4 recessions. We know what it's like. That's why you get that sense that something's changing, because although it all looks great on the outside, on the inside, there's a lot that you've got to learn, and there's a lot that you've got to do. So I think being a leader is somebody that's resilient, that's patient, that's motivated, and when things are tough, I think the group look to Richard, or look to the leader for inspiration. And sometimes the leader doesn't have it, but they've got to show that they've got it in order to drive a business forward. That's my view.
But hang on a sec, but how can you show something you haven't got?
Well, the answer is that sometimes you have to put on a brave face. You have to put on a bit of a front. And if you're not feeling it yourself, and you're having a down period or a down moment, you want to be avoiding letting everyone see that, because yes, on the one side, it's probably nice to look, to be able to be vulnerable and to tell it how it is, and for people to see you as you are. But when you're setting the example, then it can be, difficult for the team to see unless you are upbeat and bright all the time. And that's not always the case. I mean, I like to surround myself. We started to slowly but surely rebuild at Office Freedom this year. We did make some changes. We had to cut our cloth accordingly. We had to reduce the overhead. We've moved offices. Actually, we've moved to a nicer office and a bigger office for less money. But that's because I'm probably the best negotiator.
You're charging yourself rent.
Phil, you just cut me off on my best bit. I was going to do one bit of self promotion. You just cut me down. Right, I can get you back for that.
I said you're charging yourself rent.
Well, no, we're a tenant. We pay rent in a serviced office. Actually, I practice what we preach. We're in a serviced office, but it's a great office. I happened to negotiate myself a decent deal, but it was all part of that process of reducing overhead and preserving capital. But now we are slowly but surely rebuilding, and I've made a point of only rebuilding with people that I feel are a positive vibe and a positive energy. To me, is everything, especially when you work in an open plan environment, because anybody that's not feeling that, and look, no one's saying you can't have an off day. Obviously, we're only human, but I do like to surround myself with people with a positive vibe and energy. And so far, I'm actually experiencing it. I've recruited 3 or 4 people in the last month or two, and I'm noticing it. So for me as a leader, yes, I want to show the right example. I go through periods. I go through zones of, depending on different zones. Right now, I'm in the absolute go for it zone. So my alarm goes at 5 o'clock. I snooze for 10 minutes and then I go upstairs. I've got like an exercise bike at home. I go on that for like 45 minutes and then I'm straight drive to the office every day, drive into the West End. I like to go in early to avoid the traffic, and I'm at my desk normally by about 7:30. I don't leave until about 7:30 in the evening because I don't like driving in the rush hour. So I think that's doing my bit to show that some dedication and just some focus. But I've said to everyone before I employed them recently, I said, look, if you want a 9 to 5 job, this isn't for you. We are in a pandemic. You do need to understand you're coming to a company whereby you've got to roll your sleeves up and you've got to dig deep in the trenches and join the battle to survive, because that is the place we're in. So I try to set the right example. Not always, I don't always get it right, but I do my best. And I have to tell you that every time I speak to Graham, I do get a bit of motivation from him, because over the years, I've known him since I was like, a teenager. I've never, ever caught him in a bad mood. He might have been in a bad mood, but he's always upbeat and jolly. And I always put the phone down thinking, I really am happy that I've just spoken to Graham, because he's actually just got that uplifting vibe to him, which I really love. And that's why I came on here, because although I have got my own podcast, I don't love, I started it a couple of months ago and it's a bit out of my comfort zone, if I'm honest with you. But now, I don't really guess that often either, because, it's just not really in my zone, but I'm getting better and a bit more confidence. And I've definitely got a lot of that from Graham.
Thank
So
you, Richard.
thanks.
That's very kind of you to say that, Richard. I really do appreciate it. Look,
Graham, you've got something for your trail there. If you want to promote the program, that's perfect. Just cut that bit and have it. That would be brilliant.
I said something on my radio show the other week. We were talking about a glass half full, or are you a glass half full person or a glass half empty person, depending on your attitude to life. And I think that you don't need to have parameters or boundaries. I said on my radio show that I think you should just take a smaller glass and just allow it to overflow. I mean, if there's one thing we've learned in this pandemic is the simple things are the most important. Our family are important. Going for a walk is important. Just smiling or giving to other people is easy to do. I think what we've learned is that if we focus on what we want, that builds confidence. As soon as we start focusing on what we don't want and all the things that are going to go wrong, you start going down the wrong road. I mean, I coach something called business anxiety, which we, as business owners, we all know exactly what that means. And if we can create the tools, the long-lasting tools to understand what our own business anxiety is and what rocks us and the knocks that we take, and we can learn how to overcome those and become a lot more positive. I love what you said, Richard, because my mantra is that if I can give out good stuff and it helps others, especially in my coaching, then they'll pass it on. And if there's one thing that is contagious in this pandemic, that's positivity. And if you can take that and run your business with it, it will drip down to the whole culture will drip down in the organization.
There's a really trivial example. I'll say that again. There's a really trivial example of that, if you think about it. How many times, Richard, I don't know if you drive, but I would imagine you do. Graham, I know you do, because I bumped into you in Bushy High Street the other day. But I don't mean literally, don't worry, we didn't actually crash cars, but I saw him driving. Anyway, the point is, when you're out and about on the roads, I don't know about you, but I get really, really frustrated if I let someone go or I show someone a courtesy on the road and they don't say thank you. I always make a point of when someone does something as a courtesy to me as another driver, I will always make sure sometimes I overthank them because I want to make sure they know I'm grateful. But when you don't get that thanks, all it does is it puts me in a bad mood. So my thinking is that to give thanks means that someone realizes you're grateful and therefore actually means something to them because they've done some good, and subsequently they probably won't be grumpy with any other drivers they come into contact with, because I know it affects me and subsequent drivers. I know it's daft, I know it's trivial, but it's something as basic as that can have a knock-on effect.
There's also something else that Richard's got, which I'd like to mention, is that he's a man of his word. He's very honest. He acts with complete integrity, and I think, and there's a whole load of other things that he does. So I'm picking
Don't talk
you up
about
here,
those. You
Richard.
promised.
No,
You promised
I
not
won't
to.
mention those. But
Okay.
the point is that if you have those things built inside you, he's got like a heart of gold. When you've got a heart of gold, everything else just falls into place, and that's why I think he's been so successful. What would you say to that, Richard?
I say it as such a. I love you, mate. You are such a top boy. Look, I think that for me, if I see someone in trouble, yes, I want to help them, but I don't think that's anything special. I know you're like that, Phil. I'm sure you're like that. Yes, is it easy to pull on my heartstrings? Yes, it is, and I would probably, do anything if I could see that I could help someone. But I think everyone's like that most of the time, and in a way, I find doing that sometimes very good for my own mindset, because sometimes if I feel that it takes my mind off the pressures of day-to-day life, if you can actually go and do something a bit different and do your bit to assist, I think that that's all part of how we should be. And I want to just touch on what you said before when you mentioned about anxiety, Graham. I mean, I saw this morning on Sky News the MP Owen Paterson, who very, very sadly lost his wife to suicide. And he started the Rose Patterson Trust. And it's something that I saw this morning, and I just thought, you know what? I couldn't believe it when I was listening to Sky News, and he said that one person in every 90 minutes will take their own lives. And it just shook me. And he said that in the recession or the downturn of 2008, it took about 4 years. Only in 2012 did those feelings start to manifest themselves in people, and it took 4 years for that, sadly to say, that suicide rate to massively increase. So I think that now is the time that we should be doing anything we possibly can to just talk about this and actually make the point to talk to people. I'll often talk to strangers, and I'll just say, even if I'm outside in a shop, in a pub, whatever, I'll just say, look, you look down, like what's happening? How are things that bad? Is there a way you can get out of it? And I just think that there is a crucial period now, from now until the next 4 years, if it was similar to what happened in 2008, 2012, whereby people are going to manifest. And I think if we can do whatever we can to publicize this and talk to people about anxiety, and people, he said to me that his wife Rose he didn't even show any symptoms. She wasn't she didn't get to alcohol or drugs. She wasn't on any medication. It wasn't obvious. So the slightest thing that you can detect with people, just chat to them.
I mean, look, it's a very valid point, and I've been going into companies, and I've been doing lots of Zoom calls. I suffer from my own anxiety, I have my own depression through business, and I learn how to overcome it. So I've developed a methodology where the triggers of anxiety, when you feel it coming on, I've learned how to um, get into a more creative mindset to overcome that anxiety, and I teach others. I teach business leaders how to do it. I there's The funny thing is that we all suffer from a little bit of anxiety, but if it gets out of control, then we all need help, and we do need to talk, and it's become more acceptable to talk about it. It's not something we hide in the background anymore. And you're right. Members of staff need to talk about it. Business leaders need to talk about it. But there is some big solutions where you can actually use the anxiety that you're suffering from in order to propel yourself forwards and actually perform better. It's There's lots of work that needs to be done, and I really thank you for bringing that point up.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if it was a difficult subject to bring up, but like you said to me, you got to just tell it how it is, and whatever you're thinking, especially today, if we're coming on here, just be real and tell it how it is. And that's just something that I thought about. And I think anxiety and depression is, well, everyone's suffered massively in the last 12 months in some way, shape, or form with a form of anxiety or depression, and it's going to manifest itself. And I think that the whole mental health and staff wellness in my industry, it's something that is discussed quite a lot. The the buildings and the flexible serviced offices that we deal with, they all have communal areas that I see my staff actually going into, and just sometimes they just take time out, they unwind. There's all sorts of breakout areas whereby staff can just do their thing, and just obviously anybody can leave the building and go for a walk and do what they want. But to have these places inside properties, I think is the way forward for let's face it, we all spend more time in the office than we do at home in terms of a normal way of life, in terms of at work. Most of the time when you're at home, you haven't got that long of an evening, and then you sleep, obviously, and then it starts again. The Groundhog Day starts again. So therefore, in an office environment, to have as many breakout areas and downtime areas, I think is one of the massive reasons why the whole flexible workspace industry is proving so popular for mental health. It's a huge thing.
I think you've sold it to me, Richard. I think I'm going to move out of this office. That hole in the ceiling behind me has been getting on my nerves for the last 3 months. I'm going to move out and get into a nice, strong environment, and you can find me something.
Well, I'd be happy to, but I must say, just for general purposes and general reasons, it's something that I've been in office building all my life since I was like 18. I'm now 53, and I can just tell you that up until the last few years, I didn't really enjoy going to work. People normally dreaded going to work. That's just the reality. But things have changed. So look, it's been a great show. I'm sure we could be chatting for a good more few hours, because it's all coming naturally, and it's just been very enjoyable. So thank you very much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You can tell he hosts a podcast, can't he? He's wrapping this podcast up. Anyway, Richard, as you so rightly put, I'm afraid we are out of time. But if anyone does want any more information on you or Office Freedom, where do they go?
They can go to officefreedom.com, or email flex@officefreedom.com, or richard@officefreedom.com is me. So thank you so much, guys. Really appreciated it.
And you can contact me on my email, which is gg@passionateaboutbusiness.co.uk. Same website address, passionateaboutbusiness.co.uk. It's been an absolute blast. It really has.
And if for whatever ridiculous reason you want to get in contact with me, you'll find me across social media at Mr. Phil Dave. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Richard Smith, founder and CEO of Office Freedom, on behalf of Graham Godfrey and me, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us on this episode of Passionate About People.